Hello and welcome to Noble Mind.
Noble Mind is a podcast exploring mindfulness, meditation, and psychology.
Welcome, everyone. We thought we'd do something a little different today. Instead of interviewing a guest, we wanted to share about a topic that we're passionate about and think is especially timely right now. That is self-care. The world is going through a lot right now. The stakes are high this year, and many of us are losing sleep and losing track of our well-being.
Yeah, since the pandemic started, I have been working closely with a lot of helping professionals and as well as informal caregivers. And it's really been a tumultuous time for anybody who does any kind of work helping other people. Again, whether you're a professional or whether you're, just helping people in your family as well. And it may feel in some way like the hardest time to take care of ourselves, given all of the demands on us. But I actually think it's also never been more important than it is right now. So even though it feels the hardest in some ways right now, it's also really important that we just do whatever we can. And hopefully through our conversation today, we'll give folks some good ideas, some starting points, and maybe start to look at self-care in a kind of bigger or broader kind of perspective than what you're used to. So a lot of times people think of self-care and they hear, go to a yoga class, get a massage, and you feel like it maybe takes a lot of time and you don't have time. So maybe today we'll be able to give you some things that you can do even when you don't have a lot of time, because sometimes it's really just even changing how you're thinking about things, which takes some mindfulness, but not necessarily more hours per week.
So this is a richer, wider lens understanding of self-care rather than the back of the envelope, go do some yoga today.
Right. Yeah. And that's not to, say anything bad about yoga. It's fabulous and I recommend doing it. But people, maybe beneath that is this sense that people are getting perfunctory advice, that it's easy to give people a checklist of things to do. But really, it's about so much more than that. It's really about how we relate to ourselves, how we think about ourselves and our lives and what matters to us. So it's really a much deeper topic than maybe the in-service training you had at work, or the 30-minute takeaway handout or whatever somebody gave you. So hopefully, again, we'll give you some ideas that maybe feel actionable today, even in the midst of perhaps a very busy or stressful time.
Right.
So, and before we go any further, I thought I'd say a few things about self-care and some of the criticisms, because I also do want to kind of be thinking about self-care in the broader social context. So, for instance, one of the critiques of this approach to, or just to even talking about self-care, is that people say, and I think rightfully so, that self-care is not appropriate to do, or that it's being relied on too heavily in a society that puts too much pressure on the individual. So for instance, if you're in a really toxic workplace and then they bring someone in for an hour to do a workshop on self-care, but you're working 70 hours a week and you're totally being exploited and, all of this stuff, it doesn't really make sense to be encouraging self-care. So sometimes it ends up almost becoming this thing like you're supposed to do just so the man can get more out of you at work. It can feel like a tactic in some way, and then it also kind of puts a lot of pressure on the individual, so it's kind of coming out of an individualistic sort of worldview, that like one has to take care of oneself and it's only your responsibility. It's nobody else's responsibility to take care of anybody else. So it can feel sort of like it just puts more pressure on the individual, or there's lack of a sense of, or lack of even awareness of the broader social context in which self-care may or may not be happening.
So would you say that self-care prompts a rethinking, a reorienting of the individual and even of society's values?
I think it can, yeah. I mean, it's a little bit like maybe meditation or mindfulness, that it can be done in a way that, somebody may not get a lot out of it, or they may be misapplying some of the techniques and ending up not even helping themselves or hurting themselves in some way. But applying it appropriately and doing it in a way that really does sort of open oneself up or relax oneself, if we're talking about self-care, if you are actually handling your stress better, or you're able to be more effective in the world or live more according to your values, then I think self-care can be a pretty revolutionary thing, and in that it actually helps people get in touch with what really matters to them, and then to move towards that and build that life. And I think that could lead to a lot of wonderful, positive change in the world. So I just want to make sure that we're saying here that self-care is not a replacement for making changes in oppressive systems, exploitative work environments, imbalanced relationships, things like that. So if you are doing all the housework at home, and it's really out of whack with your partner or your roommates, then you can't necessarily self-care your way out of that. If you're a victim of oppression in the world, or you see oppression around you, and that's burdensome, and that causes stress, you can't self-care your way out of that, right? We need social change. We need advocacy. We need organized group efforts. People need to gather together and advocate for their rights to live a better life and in a better, safer world. So those things all need to happen. However, to only engage in social action, to ignore self-care, is also a problem. If we don't keep our own batteries charged, we're bound to burn out and end up causing ourselves and other people problems. So if we're even trying to be the most effective we can at trying to change the world, we need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. If we burn ourselves out and we're not at our best, then we can't fight the good fight either.
Now, I know you've been thinking a lot about how to help people with self-care over the years. What do you think are some of the most effective ways people can make improvements in this area?
Yeah, the big picture involves some combination of tracking what we're doing, regularly checking in with ourselves and knowing our own goals and values, really knowing what matters to us, so that, as I said before, we can be moving towards that. Having some kind of a plan or a strategy to handle the sort of inevitable obstacles that come up, both inner and outer obstacles. And then also knowing what to do that actually helps, so we don't always know even what the right skills or tools are that are going to be most helpful for us when we're grappling with various types of problems or stress, among other things. But so those are some of the things I think are most important. But what do you think?
The other thing that comes to mind is having a plan for when the person relapses, inevitably when the person falls off the wagon.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure I like the word relapse on that. I think that maybe that's pathologizing a little bit or something. But we're sort of acknowledging, there are times where we take better care of ourselves, and other times where it feels harder, but sometimes there's lots of different circumstances that might lead to that. And I wouldn't want people to start feeling bad about themselves, because I feel like this is already fraught territory where a lot of people both feel bad when they do take care of themselves, and feel bad when they don't, so self-care becomes a should, where you sort of feel bad about yourself for not doing enough of it. But then also it's something that is problematic when you do it because it feels self-indulgent or something.
I can also see how a social framework could help the individual stay on track with such a process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if nobody else in your life expects you to take care of yourself, there's going to be trouble ahead. If everybody else around you just sort of thinks you're going to be able to function like a robot and never have to have some time to yourself, get some extra sleep, have a little, whatever it is that helps you manage your stress. If no one else in your life is sort of supporting that or looking out for that, it's going to be tricky, so if you don't have anybody in your life who's like that, who's going to support and look out for you and say, how are you really, trying to find ways to move towards those people, to find supportive communities, to find support groups, to find anywhere that you've got, anybody who's going to start looking after your well-being too.
It would seem there would have to be quite a bit of problem solving along the way.
Yeah.
Sort of threaded into the whole process.
Absolutely right. Well, that's the thing. I mean, for some people, it's self-care is something that feels more easy or natural, and or they might have a life that facilitates that more. They might have a more spacious schedule, fewer demands. And some people have had a lot of support around this over the course of their lives. So it feels easy and natural to be self-caring, to stay close to your values, to know what matters to you, to be tuned in when you're stressed out, to notice that and then, tweak as needed. So for some people, it's just something that, happens very comfortably and naturally. But such people aren't necessarily probably listening to this episode, and I think probably for many more people, it's a challenge. We have a lot of things we're trying to do in life. We have a lot of things we care about. We have a lot of people we care about. We have demands. We have projects we're involved in, relationships that matter. And trying to juggle all of that can feel extremely challenging. So for those people, setting up some kind of a plan, having support from other people, like we were saying, and then, troubleshooting along the way, So I think one of the most important things, and really it's a place to start, but it's also a place that you'll sort of continue, is this idea of tracking and paying attention. So this is also where mindfulness really comes in, in the sense of being attentive, paying attention to what you're doing and how you're using your time. And so I think as a starting place, starting to just notice, hey, how am I using my time? What did I actually do today? What did I do this week or this month? What moved ahead and what didn't? What aspects of my life are getting a lot of attention? What aspects are getting neglected? And just sort of taking a moment to look back and reflect on that process, that what's going on with you, what are the areas of life that matter the most to you? And then how much time and energy are you actually spending there?
So that sounds really good. What might be a starting point? Where might people start with this journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that tracking piece, just that paying attention, so that starts with just at the end of your day or at the start of your day or, someday on your weekend, just taking 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes and just making a quick sketch, approximating, what did I do today? All right, well, I spent 5 hours on this, 3 hours on that, 2 hours on this other thing.
So first, a useful understanding of what is happening.
Right. Yeah.
So not too detailed and not with sufficient detail.
Yeah, you could drive yourself crazy trying to track every minute, and I don't think that's needed, but just kind of a broad strokes understanding of what's going on in my day, my week, my month, whatever. You could do this for a short period. You could take a few days that feel like pretty typical. A lot of people are using calendars on their phones. I tend to still prefer a paper calendar for some reason, but most people are digital at this point. So you can even reconstruct by seeing all the things that were on your calendar, or you might have your little to-do lists or task lists or whatever. So you can just, sit down for a few minutes and get a feel for what you're doing, which aspects of your life are getting attention, and about how much time, including, how much time are you getting each day to sit and rest, and how are you using that time? So if you come home from work and, or I guess you might be at home while you're working right now, but if your workday ends and then you crash on the couch and watch TV for 3 hours, then make a note of that, because that's 3 hours that you're spending watching television or reading or whatever you might be doing. So
it would involve spending some time with a calendar in terms of scheduling weekly session, seeing how you are spending your time.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily encourage scheduling anything weekly at this point. Like if we're just talking about getting started, like this is sort of, people kind of want to jump to that, I think, and sort of say like, okay, what am I going to schedule? And I think you can get there, and that's important, but just to start paying attention to what you're doing. And you might even find just by paying attention, something changes. Just because at the end of the day or at the end of the week, you're going to be making a quick note to yourself about what you did. You're going to be spending that time in reflection at the end of your day. Sometimes just looking at it changes it. I forget what they call that in research. Is it the Hawthorne effect? Is that maybe? Right. The observer influences the experiment.
Right.
So sometimes that is what happens. So doing that first. And then also there's a period of really sort of self-reflection, about what do you need and what do you want to create for yourself. And this really has to come out of what matters for you. So again, people hear about self-care and they think, oh yeah, I have to meditate 10 minutes a day or whatever, but maybe you don't. Maybe you need to dance for 10 minutes a day, like what's going to work for you? What's going to help you?
So you're suggesting before taking the calendar out and putting things in it, a period of reflection and mindfulness and awareness and clarification of one's values. Because I'm familiar with the experience of taking the calendar out, putting things in and just not doing them.
Right. Yeah.
So then concluding, I guess I can't do that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, hey, if you want to take out the calendar and schedule the days you're going to work out next week, fine. But if that works for you, fabulous. Like do it, but for a lot of people, it doesn't, because you're not taken the bigger perspective or kind of thinking through and connecting to why you're going to work out 3 times next week. What's good about that? Why should you care? And really feeling that motivation from the inside out. You're kind of just thinking like in a top down sort of way, like thou shalt work out 3 times a week, without it really feeling like it's coming from your heart, and you might decide again after this period of reflection and thinking about what really matters for you and what actually helps you. You might be like, man, I hate working out, and so you need to figure out something else, maybe it's dancing, maybe it's taking a walk instead of trying to use a treadmill, maybe it's not going to the gym, it's doing something else instead, so again, it's too easy, I think, to kind of get ahead of ourselves when we have that fleeting moment of inspiration. I need to take better care of myself, to just put something on the calendar and sort of muscle your way in and force it to happen. But I'm not sure in the long run that helps a lot of people.
So it seems it would have to be an embodied process, and that's perhaps a self-compassionate process. Perhaps it won't be smooth, and when the going gets tough, then it's going to make a big difference whether the person has formulated and connected with their values.
Yeah, that sounds good. I know embodiment and self-compassion are things that you're particularly interested in. So how do you think it might look different if you were trying to be more self-caring and create a kind of self-care plan for yourself, but from a more embodied place or a more self-compassionate place?
I would think that a meditative process where the person gets to connect with themselves and gets to take stock with kindness with themselves. In the absence of that, it would be hard for this to end well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important, if you're really going to spend a little time trying to reflect on this sort of self-care journey, right? Or you're self-caring. I sort of like to think of it as a verb, like we're being self-caring. It's not like I'm doing this self-care task so I can check it off my list. It's a way of living, that is self-caring. And again, this is where I think we get stuck with this I don't have time for self-care sort of idea. Well, okay, you don't have time to get a massage this week, but maybe you don't need time to try to be more self-caring. Maybe that being more self-caring would change a lot of your day-to-day, even just how you relate to yourself, how you talk to yourself in your own mind. It's like, as you're talking about self-compassion, it's that idea of self-kindness, right? Just sort of being a good friend to yourself in your own mind, So your self-talk, I think this is something like I sort of like bold caps lock underline. The most important thing for your self-care is your self-talk, because your self-talk is with you all day, every day, all the time. So whether you get a massage or not, whether you have time to do anything this week or not, you are with yourself every waking hour. So you can have self-caring, self-talk that will change how you feel about your life.
Because constructing self-caring self-talk would take some effort and perhaps help from the outside. In mindful self-compassion, as you well know, there's this idea of backdraft where when the person receives kindness, that brings up memories of times when they didn't in the past. So then a painful experience arises. For me, I think self-care connects to backdraft. The other piece, of course, is if the person has internalized ways of relating to themselves from the outside, where if they think they don't deserve to be treated so well because they haven't been performing fantastically well. So then there can be a lot of internal resistance to self-care, I imagine, which would be puzzling for the person and perhaps discouraging. What's going on?
Right. You may not yet have that level of insight as, you're able to articulate it very clearly, that this is a phenomenon, but someone who's living that may take them a long time to realize that. If I were aware that that was going on in a person, or if you're asking me sort of without asking, what would one do in such a circumstance, then I would suggest that for such a person, merely starting your self-care with not being so self-neglecting would be a starting point. So instead of trying to necessarily build out a whole array of, self-caring self-talk or a whole bunch of really self-caring activities, I might move them towards that by seeing what are the ways you're really self-critical in your self-talk and what are the ways you're maybe really self-neglecting in your life. And can we just move the needle a little bit towards a more neutral place? So can we try to just notice that self-criticism and back off from it a little bit? We don't have to yet put in all the self-caring self-talk, but can we at least try to soften this sort of allegiance to the self-critical voice?
I mean, one thing I'm curious about is, so for instance, what I know about the military is they don't teach people how to be self-caring, but they can get people to get up at a certain time and exercise and do these things. So I suppose it's possible to develop, quote, self-discipline without being self-caring necessarily.
There's this great quote, I'm forgetting who said it now, but it's this quote that discipline brings freedom. And that's been my experience of discipline, is that, having routines and habits, having things I can rely on, having a structure to my life to some degree that allows me to relax and create space and a sense of freedom, because I don't have to worry about like, what am I doing every day at every moment, or am I ever going to get around to whatever, there's some sort of foundation. So having that foundation, which one could call discipline in the sense that, things routinely happen at scheduled times or at a certain volume or whatever, that you could, from the outside, somebody might say, oh yeah, you're pretty disciplined.
Perhaps a dual track approach where there's both structure and reinforcement and also some digging up to look at these deeper dynamics, not just one or the other.
I think people need to know themselves and just really be honest with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Does that work for you? Would a boot camp approach work to you? It sounds like you're talking about kind of like that boot camp style, like, well, this is when we get up, so let's get up. For some people, that's fabulous. That works really well. And they're like, thank you. Like structure, discipline, that sort of discipline brings freedom idea. Like it works, phew, like I can surrender to this, when I do retreats, there's this sort of surrender to the schedule. That's the sort of recommendation when you show up on a long retreat, is to just sort of like, just surrender to the schedule. At 7 a.m. we do this, at 8 a.m. we do that, And for people who feel like that works, it's a wonderful thing. But if you are somebody who maybe you've had difficulties with authority in your life. Maybe you've had authority figures who've been abusive to you. You've had people who've, tried to manipulate and control and dominate you. Like, I'm going to go ahead and guess, like, if you've had those types of really problematic experiences, that then a boot camp approach is going to be pretty triggering. It's going to bring up resentment. It's going to bring up rebellion. It's going to bring up, well, like, F you, I don't want to do that. Like, I'm just not going to do it because you want me to do it, even though it's for my own good, because you don't like to be treated that way, so we really, and that's fine too. It just means you need a different approach, so I think just starting off with a sense of that openness and that sense that there's a lot of different pathways to creating a sort of self-caring life which may or may not have anything, sort of like what you're describing in that kind of scheduled or boot campy kind of way.
Mm.
And it really needs to come from your own self-knowledge about what approaches work for you. So that goes back to that kind of idea of looking back and doing a little bit of self-reflection. Like, who am I? What works for me? There must be something in your life at some point,
Right.
that has inspired you and kept you going and mattered to you. And what was it about that worked? Was it that you had social supports, people, a cheerleading squad kind of, giving you a high five at the finish line or whatever? What was it that made it work? Was it that you had time alone, away from other people? What actually is it that works for you to help you? Again, we're talking about self-care. We're talking about creating a life that feels like it has some kind of balance where there's space for you and your own needs.
I was reading that something like 80% of people don't exercise regularly. So I imagine those people are maybe thinking, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just do it? And you're suggesting that it's a deeper exploration and or sustained work on it is what's going to help. Not just a simplistic, just do it, perhaps. Although that can be a useful tool, I suppose.
Right. Again, you just need to understand yourself a little bit. And if whatever attempts, first of all, is exercise even a goal for you? If it's not a goal for you, it doesn't need to even be on the list. So health might be something you value, but maybe exercise isn't particularly your jam. So you want to think about, well, how do I take care of my health without ever stepping into the gym or taking a fitness class? Maybe that's your dream. So, like, again, we want to create a life that is built around what really matters to you, not what somebody tells you matters. Again, if we're sort of thinking of, we're at the sort of around the starting line of trying to recalibrate our lives so that they have more balance and more attention to ourselves and our own needs, then thinking about what really matters to me and what am I neglecting? So that might be, right now, what really matters to me, like I'm neglecting, my time for creative writing. I'm neglecting my friendships. Because I promise you, people out there who are listening, I hear you that, there are things in your life you're not doing right now to take care of yourself because you're too busy taking care of other people or just trying to stay afloat in the middle of this pandemic / national crisis time. So there's things that we're not doing right now. And it doesn't make sense with that little bit of room you might be able to create to put a should in there, to put something you like, try to find something that, really you value a lot.
How would you suggest a person goes about creating a plan for the obstacles?
Yeah. So getting a sense of, again, like, what are those obstacles that are likely to come up for you? And think about inner obstacles and think about outer obstacles. So the outer obstacles, probably more easy to more quickly name. It might be family obligations. It might be work demands. And then some of those inner obstacles are some of the things we've already sort of been talking about, being very sort of self-critical, being someone who's going to rebel at any hint of a schedule, being somebody who, maybe you've got a little bit of a martyr thing going on, that you're supposed to be self-sacrificing to be a good person. So like any attention paid to your needs actually goes against this sort of core belief or this sort of value or sort of assumption that to be a good person means to be completely self-neglecting. So if you have things like that, again, some time and reflection, some exploration, some journaling, thinking about what are some of these maybe self-defeating or unhelpful little things do I have going on, and then when I see that coming up, what type of strategies might I put in place? So if you tend to be really self-critical, thinking about, like we were saying a few minutes ago, maybe there's some self-compassionate things you can sort of start to prioritize. Maybe that's the first step, is just doing a few self-compassion practices. Maybe your first step on the journey to becoming more self-caring is just to become less self-critical.
Okay, so let's say the person has taken a good look at what the obstacles may be, what sort of internal dynamics are arising, and they have a sense of what sort of values are connected to what sort of self-care goals. So, and they have been tracking a little bit. So they have a lot more awareness about themselves and how they operate. Then what? Then what would be the next?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, that sounds fabulous, right? Yeah, right. It sounds like a good place to be. And just to note that, like, these obstacles are lifelong journeys. Not all of them. Some of them you can kind of be like, oh, is that what I'm doing? That's not helpful, and just sort of stop. But just to note, like, making sure you have the help and support that you need to sort of work through things that might be dynamics that have bedeviled you for years, and that you might need, a therapist or some other type of support to continue to help work through. So if you tend to be very self-critical or self-defeating, there may be that there's some therapeutic support that can continue to help you in those areas. But, generally speaking, imagining that we've got a sort of a plan, we have a general sense of what matters to us, and we're sort of ready now to start kind of looking ahead a little bit, right? We're starting to say like, oh, okay, here's what matters to me, right? And here's what doesn't matter to me. Again, don't just create some list of shoulds, of what you think self-care is supposed to look like. Really creating a plan that's going to work for you, so maybe it's just something really small, like I'm going to try to find 15 minutes this week to do a guided relaxation exercise. Or maybe I'm going to find 20 minutes on the weekend to, read a novel or practice my piano or something. Maybe it's just something that small. So one place where people get really stuck with any kind of change is trying to do too much change at once. And I think there's some research to back this up, that for most people, it seems to work that small changes, it's better to start with small changes and then, kind of let those get bigger as the ball rolls downhill. But for some situations, the sort of total life makeover kind of strategy, it can be helpful at certain times. So this is, again, kind of knowing yourself. Like if you feel like I need a total life makeover tomorrow morning, like this is what I'm going to do. And that, that kind of all or nothing, like, again, sort of a boot campy sort of style works for you, then have at it, have some fun with it. Consider it an experiment, see if it works. But if that's not your thing, you're not alone. And it does seem like for most people, it's more the kind of little bit at a time. Give yourself successes. So as you're starting to think about implementing some kind of new plan, again, maybe it's just 15 minutes a week or 30 minutes a week for some tiny little thing that helps you. Or maybe it's like a 10-minute watching stand-up comedy on your lunch break to boost your mood, or maybe it's just like taking a moment of reflection at night while you're brushing your teeth to remind yourself that, hey, you did a good job today. Good for you, because we're trying to combat that self-criticism. We're trying to develop that self-caring self-talk. So even if you don't have time to add anything to your schedule, maybe you can just create a little moment while you're doing something else already to just start to cultivate that perspective of like, hey, go me, or like, here's what I'm grateful for. Some kind of appreciation for yourself, your life, your good work. So whatever those small things are, but you want to set yourself up with early wins, lots of success early on. So like, what's one thing that you can do tomorrow, or one way you can self-reflect in a positive, self-caring way tomorrow that feels doable, that you're going to be able to give yourself a high five at the end of the day because you did it? What would be that one thing?
Mm-hmm. So identifying, becoming aware of what works for you, and then adding to that toolbox of other tools that work for you. Mm-hmm. And at times you're saying take like a turtle or a hare approach. You could try
right,
different things, see what happens, or what works now, when.
Yeah. I think what I'm sort of noticing between the lines here is having a spirit of play and creativity or curiosity and an experimental approach. Like, yeah, see what happens. Give it a day, a week, whatever. And then, because, we haven't talked about this yet, but another important thing is to just keep noticing, staying attentive, finding a way to check in with yourself in some kind of regularity. And again, maybe it helps to have someone else you check in with, like a self-care buddy or something, some way to say, how am I doing? How'd the last week go? Did I do whatever I had hoped to do, whether it was just changing my self-talk a little bit or adding or changing some routine so it serves me and my needs a little bit better? So having that way to check in with yourself regularly, this does not go off the table. This may get forgotten about from time to time, which is okay, but we come back to it, and then it's just always sort of being monitored, but monitor sounds like not a good word because it sounds
supervised.
Yeah, right. That sounds way too formal. It's a little bit maybe like the playground monitor or something, because you want to have that feeling of curiosity, play, exploration. You're trying to live your life, according to what matters most to you. You're trying to make space in your life for you and your needs, to have some equity between yourself and your needs and the needs of other people. Again, right now, for many people, this is why we're talking about this today, that is way out of whack, that there's not room for oneself and one's needs. Everyone else's needs is what's getting the priority, So, but this is something that we're trying to sort of work on over the long term. It's something that really matters.
And it would seem without a good dose of self-awareness and self-connection, this would be difficult to do.
Yeah, although that's what you're cultivating as you're doing it too. I mean, you could say it's a prerequisite, but you could also say it's an outcome.
Right. This is a place where you could cultivate those in these domains.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Another thing we haven't talked about yet is also just the importance of knowing what you don't know, and that there might be some skills or tools worth learning,
Known unknowns.
The known unknowns, right? Yeah. So like if you just don't know how, for instance, how to de-stress yourself when you feel yourself getting cranked up, if your shoulders are earrings, or if you're having muscle spasms in your back because you're so tense, or you're grinding your teeth at night, or having panic attacks, or like whatever it is for you, how it's showing up for you. If you're really experiencing a lot of stress, you may need to learn some new skills, right? You may actually need to, whether it's read a book or watch a few YouTube videos or whatever, we can put some links on our show notes page. You need to start to learn how to downregulate, how to calm and soothe yourself. So you may note as you're reflecting back and looking ahead, as you're sort of taking stock, what have I been doing? What haven't I been doing? What do I want to create? What do I need? It may be that you make some notes about what you need to learn. It might be, I need to learn how to do some relaxation practice, or I need to learn, whatever else it might be, some ways of combating self-criticism. So that can be a goal, that can be something you move towards.
So I can see that for those of us who may have experienced adverse childhood events or traumatic experiences, this may be even more challenging. So that perhaps would require some extra work or support.
Sure. I mean, I think maybe another way of thinking about it is just that everyone's starting line is different. Whether it's because you've had trauma or not, we all sort of show up, if we all show up to this podcast thinking about self-care, bringing with us whatever we've learned so far in our lives. And for some people, maybe we feel like we've got a good backpack, full of tools that are helpful to us. And some of us might feel like we're saddled with things that are really weighing us down. So if that's the case, if you feel like you're saddled with things weighing you down and you're going to need extra help and support, then we need to make sure you get that, whether that's through psychotherapy, whether that's through, self-help books, whether that's through, there's so many online courses available right now and, things out there for resources for people. So just really knowing yourself and knowing where your starting place is, and then trying to support yourself wherever that starting line is and whatever you need at this point.
And reaching out for allies perhaps, and for being open to information and approaches that will give us new tools to put in our toolbox and help us take the rocks out of the backpack. So.
Exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. Again, like if you're somebody who's going to be grappling with, like, let's say you were sort of raised to think you're not allowed to have needs. Like it's not appropriate to have needs. Your only duty is to care for everybody else around you. in an imbalanced way, that's self-neglecting and all of that, then knowing that about oneself, we need to just have a very gentle first stab at any of this. The first step, the first goal might be, let me start to really think on whether I believe that. Do I really believe that I'm not allowed to have any of my needs met in this world? Is that how I want to live my life? Is that true, or is that just what I was taught? Is that something someone told me because it served them?
Conditioning.
Yeah, right. And so sometimes we need to step back and think about, okay, well, this is how I've been living. These have been my operating assumptions. But maybe I can upgrade those. Maybe it's time for 2.0 version, and that's a journey. That takes time. You don't just decide one day and flip a switch and all those old beliefs are gone, but you sort of start to gradually over time internalize a new set of operating assumptions by articulating them and choosing them and then trying to reinforce them. So we've got a plan here now, and we're thinking about, what do I need to learn? Maybe it's some stress management skills. Maybe it's some tools to help change my self-talk. But then also, if you're thinking there's something I want to do, there's maybe something you want to learn that would be rewarding for you or fun. So don't forget, when you're thinking about what matters to you and what your goals are in life, in terms of those sort of domains of life, or what those core values might be that you want to live by, like recreation matters. Like leisure, play, recreation, that's part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Like we have a right to play, recreation, leisure, that really matters.
They're not optional.
It's not optional, right? It's a basic human right. So maybe you don't have enough of that. And so you want to play. So you want to learn how to do something fun. You want to learn a new game. You want to master chess. You want to, finally start doing some kind of abstract painting or something, so let there be space there for that kind of fun. So now what we're doing is actually getting into action mode here. And again, remembering like these can be the very smallest actions, and the action itself could even be just fooling around with how you talk to yourself in your day. It could be that simple when you're really busy, and you're going to just be, working a 12-hour shift at the hospital or something. Like all you can do is during those few moments between patients, just saying something calming and soothing to yourself. That would be a good start in a very busy time. Or while you're sitting in your car waiting for the takeout or waiting to pick up your kid from somewhere, just putting on your favorite song on the radio, or just saying a few soothing things to yourself. Every little bit matters right now. So then once we're getting into action, again, whatever that action might be, really starting to create some, gentle structure for yourself in order to not sort of fall off track with this, to lose track of this, So this is where we're talking about, maybe it's having a self-care buddy. Maybe there's like 15 minutes somewhere in your week that you can use as a check-in, like a grounding time. You could sort of think of all different clever things you could call it for yourself. We don't want it to feel like a meeting with the boss. We don't want it to feel like a trip to the principal's office, right? We want it to feel like
the Godfather.
Right. Right. We want it to feel like a check-in, like a friendly, like a visit with a good friend. Hey, how was your week? Tell me, what was your week like? What was good? What was hard? Tell me all about it. You wanted to have that energy, that feeling of like, this is a supportive space. This is like, okay, all right, sweetie, like, how'd this go? And then just taking a moment to check in with yourself. What was that one thing you had set out for this week? Maybe you were going to try to intervene with your self-talk. Maybe you were going to find 15 minutes to dance it out at home, or, do something over your lunch break to get some fresh air or something. Did you do it? Not in like a, did you do it, young man kind of way, but just like, hey, did that happen? Oh, it didn't. Oh, bummer. And then we get curious. What happened? Playful, curious. Of course, the first week you try anything, it's going to be glitchy. So expect glitchy. Oh, it was a glitchy week. You're right on track. Oh, you did it once, but you had wanted to do it twice or 3 times. Okay, no biggie. What worked that time that you did it? And what do you think some of those obstacles were when you didn't? All right, reassess, new plan, do over, refresh, reboot. What's up for next week?
More like a fun science experiment, less courtroom drama.
Yes. Exactly. Right. Exactly. Right. I love it. Right. Yeah. So we're checking in with ourselves, but that again, that energy of how we check in with ourselves is so important. That sort of vibe that we create when we do that. Anything you can do to help that vibe be more supportive, playful, curious, compassionate, the more likely it is you'll stick with it, because we want it to feel like grounding and settling. Maybe how some people feel when they go to church on the weekends. If they're a spiritual person and you sort of, once a week you sort of sit in the pew or, whatever your place of worship is, and you just feel like, take a breath. There's a feeling of sort of spiraling back to that place that's grounding. Or maybe it's once a year, I don't know, you go home for the holidays, and maybe that feels good for you. For a lot of people, I know it's stressful, but for some people that coming back home feels like a touch point, right? So I'm trying to sort of create or connect this experience of the weekly checking in with other similar types of, it feels settling, right? It feels like, right, tuning back into myself, coming back home to myself. Spiraling back around. One more week. How'd it go? And then let's look ahead. This part here is, I think, where a lot of people end up off the track a little bit, is that you sort of maybe take some time, you come up with some plan, and then again, if we're thinking about troubleshooting or places where these things sort of fall apart, one is that the plan you create is not your plan, it's some plan full of shoulds that you're supposed to do. Another place where people get stuck is that the plan is way too ambitious, that it's not practical in some basic way. Another place that people get stuck is that the plan is not specific enough. It's sort of like, I want to meditate more. Okay, how about I have 10 minutes Wednesdays on my lunch break. I'm going to meditate Wednesday on my lunch break for 10 minutes. And better yet, 5, I want to win. So that's another sort of place people get stuck, is that whatever the plan is, not a guaranteed win that you can build successes from. It's something that is perilous, and is going to lead to more discouragement. Yeah. So those are some of the plan level kind of struggles that people might have sort of going into it. But then the other one, which is sort of where I'm leading here now, is that you have a great plan. You might even implement it a little bit, but you don't pay attention to it. And so it doesn't become a habit. And so it's not sustainable change. It's not something that actually sustains. You might, have a really good month, and then you stop doing it. And what makes something sustain, is consistent attention to it. Is not forgetting about it. And to do that, we need to check in. We need to keep checking back with ourselves. Hey, how was your week? Hey, how was your month?
And perhaps reinforcing.
Yeah, right.
An effective action takes place.
Yes, celebrating your successes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And I can imagine that what Rick Hansen calls taking in the good can be really useful here, both in terms of memories perhaps, or successes from the week, or looking forward to things. The good feeling that one gets when does certain things. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because in the sort of realm of psychology, it's just a very basic principle. What gets rewarded, happens more. Rewards increase behavior. So a reward includes patting yourself on the back. A reward includes saying, go me, a reward includes, checking in with yourself and seeing hey man, I nailed that this week, fabulous. So when we reward ourselves, or we find rewards in the environment, maybe there's ways that the behavior itself can be rewarding. You might realize, gosh, it feels really good to take those 10 minutes to meditate on Wednesday, Oh, okay. Well, then maybe it becomes self-reinforcing and it's an easier habit to keep going. Now, by contrast, self-punishment has very untoward results, including self-judgment, I suppose. Is that what you...
For sure, right. So
Hmm.
rewards increase behaviors, punishments decrease behaviors. And punishment includes berating yourself or reminding yourself how you didn't measure up, and looking at your to-do list or your plan on a check-in and saying, "Oh, I didn't get anything done. Oh, I'm such a loser. Da, da, da. I knew I'd fail at this," right? That's all. You're punishing yourself. And so no wonder it's hard to stick with a plan, because whenever you try to have a plan, you end up getting down on yourself about it, punishing yourself, and then you're less likely to stick with it because it hurts.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I can imagine it would be possible for people to mistake self-judgment, self-attack for objective evaluation. Well, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't do it, but the meanings attached to it and the emotional experience of it is punishing,
Right,
which
right.
would make it less likely that you even want to think about it,
Right.
let alone go back
Totally.
and do it again.
Totally right. Yeah. Right. I didn't do it could lead to a cascade of self-judgment, or what would be another option? I didn't do it could lead to, I wonder why I didn't do that. How weird.
Hmm.
That makes me curious. Or tweak it. Oh, that wasn't so fun. Maybe next week I'll try this. All right, try that out. So the one thing you say at the beginning is that's not a contract for life that you've just made. I guess that's the point I'm making,
Hmm.
right? This is a start. And you might decide, yeah, that worked. That was fun. I'm going to do that again next week. In fact, I'm going to try to do that for the next month or two. And then after a month or two, make a note on your calendar, whatever, check in. How's this going? It was good for a couple months, but it's not lighting my fire anymore. So you need to reassess what's working. Life changes, your demands change, but also your priorities change. Maybe you get pregnant. Maybe you become a grandparent. Maybe you lose your job. Maybe you get a new job. With my teaching, every semester is a little different. So thinking, what can I fit in this semester? What am I going to be able to fit in next semester? So whatever the way your own life is structured, think about, like, things change over time, so creating that time and that space to reassess and tweak things, or just clear the decks and start anew. If
Hmm.
you've had a major life transition, you might be sort of starting up from scratch, and that's fine. That's life, you know?
So it's not a life sentence. Like,
Yeah, you're not,
yeah.
whatever. Because I think that's one of the things people get afraid to set a goal, because they think they're, signing a contract for life. It's just like, this is just what matters now. And this just seems like the best way to do it now. And a month from now, it could be totally different, or a year from now, it could be totally different.
So that idea about never ever give up. So perhaps never ever give up on yourself or caring or your values, but
Yeah.
the methods could be tweaked.
Yes. Right. Yeah,
Mm.
exactly. Right. Yeah, dogged pursuit of a goal that's no longer relevant for you just because it was what you wanted when you were 18. Like, I'm going to be a rock star. Okay, well, do you still want to be a rock star? If you do, have at it, but maybe you don't anymore. Like, maybe there's some other priority, and that's cool. That's fine. Like, that's expected, in life.
Wonderful.
So this was a great conversation. I just love talking about this topic. It's something I'm really passionate about. And if people liked this conversation and are sort of inspired and thinking more about this, I will be actually starting to have an online class on this topic with some support, some check-ins for people, as well as a structured process to go through some of what we talked about today. So you could just go to my website at drkateking.com, and you can sign up to stay in touch about the course as it's being developed. It's been such a hard year, and I know that may make a lot of us want to just put our head in the sand,
Mm.
and not want to be sort of thinking about these things. And it might be that we even set some goals for 2020 and they all blew up in our face because of the pandemic and everything else that's been going on. So really just want to encourage folks to be kind to yourself and, set goals that feel doable and manageable. And what's really most important is that, you're sort of tuned into what your own needs are in balance with all the other needs and demands in your life. And if you have time on Wednesdays, I am leading a 30-minute relaxation session every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You're all welcome to attend. It's free, open to the public, so you can, again, just go to drkateking.com and you'll see the sign up. The events are called Unwind, so it's a 30-minute session to unwind and chill out a little bit in the middle of your week. And I hope to see you there, and we'll also put some of that information on our show notes page as well.
Thank you so much, Kate.
We hope that you enjoyed this conversation just between the two of us. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening today.
If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you'll hit subscribe, leave us a great rating or review, and spread the word. You can also go to noblemindpodcast.com to join our email list. You'll get a weekly behind-the-scenes message, news, announcements, and other special goodies we come up with just for you. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.